The most common question I get with this BMW 760 is, what is it like driving a car with a V12 engine, a big 6-liter V12? I gotta say it's different. It's definitely different. The first thing you'll notice is right now I'm idling, I'm going about 5 miles an hour. It's pretty much dead silent. You can hear crickets outside over the engine noise. Now, I'm also in sport mode, which means I'm driving in first gear. If I switch it back to regular mode, it'll go into second gear and the car literally becomes silent, not figuratively. I hear the crickets. You don't hear the car, you hear the crickets. And if I give it a little gas, you'll see I'm moving, but you still don't hear the car. Now, if I switch it back into sport mode or manual mode, and where I can engage first gear, which I'm going to do right now. Okay, right now it's in first gear, M1 as you can see. And it doesn't get loud like a normal car, but it does move like. So it really picks up, but it doesn't get roaring loud, it just gets angry loud, which is very pleasant and refined would be the word. So I'm gonna get it out of manual because I can't shift easily while I'm on the camera, and put it back into sport. And the interesting thing is, in sport, it is incredibly aggressive gearing. Like, it's constantly in the lowest possible gear. Like, I'm heading downhill now, I can feel it's in 1. If I give it a little more gas to raise the speed, now it'll shift into 2 because it can't stay in 1 that much farther. But it's way more aggressive than pretty much any car I've driven. And I've driven the V10 M6 from BMW, and it wasn't even that aggressive compared to this car. The gearing in sport is crazy, crazy low. I don't know if it'll even access 6th gear, which is the maximum gear when it's in sport mode. If you like electric cars because they're quiet, you will love this car. I'm now doing 35 miles per hour. It is dead silent in here. Absolutely not a sound. You cannot hear the engine in the slightest. Okay, 35 isn't the fastest thing, but if I hit, that's the speed limit on this road, I can't go faster. But if I were doing 50, 60 even, it's still just as quiet until you give it a lot of throttle. That's the whole thing. It is just dead silent. And the reason has to do with the fact that when you have 12 cylinders, the RPM range is lower. So in other words, if on a 4-cylinder car, it's pretty normal to have a red line of around 7,800 or 8,000 RPM. On this car, the red line is a little over 6,000 RPM because you get all the power between 1,000 and 6,000 RPM. So by having a lower engine speed, it keeps the engine quieter. You also have 1/12 of the workload. The workload is divided by 12 instead of 4, 6, or 8 cylinders like in a normal car. So each cylinder is working a lot less for each cycle, and that keeps everything nice and quiet and humming along. Now, the other factor that's interesting is the sound that a V12 makes. Most people assume it's this roaring sound like a mean V8. It actually doesn't. It sounds more like a sewing machine, honestly. It goes. You can hear the fuel injectors going 12 times every cycle, and it's just quiet and calm calm. So what exactly is the sound of a V12 humming away? Everybody wants to know. First of all, there's a bunch of crickets around, and they're making a much louder sound than the sound of this engine. So I hope you're going to be able to hear this. But let's step out and take a look. Let's have a look and see. And you can all hear, it's not very loud, the engine. It's pretty good. I need 2 hands for this, hang tight. You hear that sound? Sounds just like a sewing machine, only louder a little bit, just a little louder. But the engine's huge, just huge. Look at me and look at the size of that engine. I'm a really big dude, and that's a really big engine. That's 6 liters. I mean, most 4-cylinder cars are around 2 liters. It's like 3 engines in 1. I mean, it's a 6-liter V12. One of the more notable factors of this V12 is the amount of heat that comes off of this thing. It is just warm. I mean, in the daytime out right now, it's about 70 some odd degrees Fahrenheit. This is just blowing hot air, like it must be over 100 degrees, the air coming off of that thing. It's just blowing it off. If you ever want to like cook your lunch, just leave it on this engine. It's faster than a microwave. People are assuming this thing is going to roar when you hit the gas because it's, oh my God, 12 cylinders. but that's not actually what it does. It actually sounds kind of like a sewing machine, and it's very mild and mellow and well-mannered, kind of like that dinner guest you have who eats everything with his knife and fork and yet can bench press 300 pounds. So it's, that's the best way to describe it. It moves like a freight train when you give it gas, but it doesn't sound like one. It sounds quiet and content, and just content. Like right now I'm doing 20, you don't even hear it, and I'm in sport mode, which is typically a little louder because it's in a 1 gear lower than when you're not in sport mode. And watch what happens when I find a clear place to floor it. See, you see the actual speed go up, but you hear nothing. And I just ended up on a dirt road. Guess I gotta turn around. Bloopers! One of the other nice advantages of a V12 is how completely quiet and silent it is. I can whisper in here and you'll still hear me because you don't hear the engine at all, but I'm moving, and I'm moving at 20 miles an hour, and it's just quiet and peaceful and nice. It's a really phenomenal vehicle. It's a phenomenal ride. It's very level to the ground. I honestly don't know if the suspension in this car uses any form of leveling or magnetic anything, but it's really, really solid. It doesn't have much body lean at all. Like right now, I'll go around a curve, I'll give it a little gas, and it just stays perfectly level with the ground, even that was a fairly sharp curve. It's just such a pleasant experience in this car. That's the best word for it, pleasant. I mean, would you like some Grey Poupon? That's like the kind of experience it is. One of the interesting quirks of this car is that when you shift it into drive, there's no jolt from the transmission. Like most cars you put into drive and you feel a little engagement, like a bump of an engagement. This car, you don't do that. And also, if you notice, the shifter is identical to an S-Class Mercedes of the current year, even though this car is from 2006. But if you notice, I put it into drive and the car doesn't move at all, but yet I am engaged, because if I remove my foot from the brake, the gear is indeed engaged. And if I stop and then put it into park, nothing. There's no bumping or jolting, nothing. You can't feel the car go between drive, reverse, park at all. It feels nothing. It just, look at this, check it out. Park to drive. That's it. I can take my foot off the brake and the car just starts rolling. This car is totally rock solid. I mean, it's the most solid feeling vehicle that I've driven. Maybe second only to the S-Class Mercedes, the current one. That I'd say is probably more solid than this, but it's a really close competition. The S-Class Mercedes, you feel nothing, like you're in a cloud, and this you still have road feel, which is a nice advantage to this car, but at the cost of a little bit marginally less of that rock solid feel. Like you can't make this thing slide or tail or nothing, but this is fun. I like this car. Gas mileage, that's another common question. What kind of gas mileage do you get with this car? Frankly, if you have to ask, you can't afford a V12. It's straight up. In New York City, I get 8 miles per gallon. I'm not even kidding, 8 miles per gallon. I'm right now in Boston, and on the trip up here, I got 19.5 miles per gallon, which is a record high driving this car. I've been driving around now to city, and it reduced it down to 17.8, as you can see, for the meantime. I'm also in sport mode now because I'm enjoying the car a little bit, but when I was on the long haul from New York City to Boston, it was in regular standard fuel efficient mode for pretty much the whole 200 plus mile trip. So 19.5 miles per gallon is about as good as you're going to get out of this car, because that's about as optimal driving style as possible. 8 miles per gallon is what you get in the city. 8, not 80, not 1.108. It's 8. Just a number, a single digit number. 8. The sport mode on this car is extremely aggressive and always starts you in first gear when you're at a standstill. When you have a big V12 with so much torque that it really doesn't feel that great off the line in first gear unless you're trying to race the car. But when you're just having like a normal stop and go traffic like I am right here in downtown Boston, it's just a little bit rough. I mean, every little time you want to inch up, it's like every time, because it's kind of like a cat trying to get out of a cage and roar forward. It's got too much power. You can see the front of the car lift up even when I hit the gas. I don't know if that's visible in the camera, but you certainly feel it. Every little slight touch to the throttle makes it feel like you want to just take off and run a race, and like you're in NASCAR. And as soon as you shut off the sport mode and going back into like regular mode, I'll do it right now. And then the littlest touch is like super smooth, like you're in a limousine, and like a Maybach smooth, like a Rolls Royce smooth. It just glides away. It's amazing how the two driving modes have such completely different driving profiles. But I like the feel of the sport mode because it consistently downshifts you to the lowest possible gear whenever you, wherever you are and whatever style of driving you're in. If you're going downhill, the car will go into the lowest possible gear it can take down that hill, and it acts almost like a descent control that you get on the SUVs. Sometimes it's called like hill control or something like that slows you down on the way down. It's incredible. It's the most amazing feeling, and you don't get that when you are in the standard non-sport mode. Because don't keep pulling out of the driveway. You got to stay on your toes when you drive here. But it doesn't quite have that when you're not in sport mode, and it's a nice feeling that to always be in the lowest possible gear. Now, mind you, that also means it's using the most amount of gasoline, but I'm not too worried about that. Otherwise, I would have bought a V12. Man, these are monstrously large speed bumps here in Beacon Hill, right next to John Kerry's house. Wow. They want to be 100% sure you don't go too fast.
Yo, 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 yo.